Shalom everyone, Boker Tov, still Boker. Rabbi Eric Solomon here in Raleigh, North Carolina, on a sunny day before the storm. Wish you a little morning Torah for Shabbat. It's also the holiday of Tu B'Shvat is coming soon. Holiday of the trees. Doesn't feel like that here in Raleigh, but in the land of Israel, the sap is coming down into the trees and spring's just starting on the horizon. All right, Tov, let's come to the Torah portion. So, Bishalach includes Shrat Hayam. This is Shabbat Shirah, because it has a beautiful poem in the middle. This is that kind of culminating parsha where all these excess Torah portions are happening. We're slaves, Moshe, Aaron, Miriam, etc., Pharaoh, 10 plagues, etc. Finally, we're let free. Finally, we go through the Sea of Reeds in that powerful moment where Pharaoh says we can go. Last week's morning Torah, I talked about Pharaoh says, fine, bless me as you go. Finally, let my people go. And then at the end, as we cross through the sea, and Moshe is on the other side with our people, and we see Pharaoh and his chariots and all his soldiers sink in and are killed. This is that culminating thing, and there's a song of the sea that is chanted. Okay, so that's all the background. So what do I want to talk about here? Writ large, if you look at Moshe, okay, and I'm going to hopefully make a connection here to the great Martin Luther King, Alav Shalom as well. Writ large, Moshe is like the leader of, par excellence of our people, of the Torah, of Judaism. I mean, you could say something could be Western civilization. I mean, Moshe is just an incredible figure, incredible story. But one way, if you follow me here, if you take a little, poetic license or drash read, sermonic, rabbinic opportunity to read Moshe's life, is one of the main things he's really struggling with is conflict. How is he going to deal with conflict, with injustice, but really speaking up for justice? Now, the classic read and the one I love, and, Moshe stood up and he spoke out, just like Martin Luther King, and that this is like the glorious thing, this is praiseworthy. I don't know if you call it easy, but it was natural, and it's in fact worthy of modeling, which I believe is true. But if you look at Moshe's life, conflict, dealing with conflict, it didn't come naturally to him. It wasn't easy. And in fact, I think that if I put a read into it, he avoided it at first. And eventually when he came to become one where he was willing to say the tough things, be prophetic, have conflicts, he dealt with the ultimate consequence, I think, of what conflict or people who raise conflict have to deal with. And so especially as leaders, and I think this particularly Martin Luther King may have had to deal with it as well. So let me explain. So one way of looking at Moshe's life, especially as a baby, right? We know the story a few parshas ago, is when Pharaoh says, I'm going to kill all the young children, babies of the Hebrew people, boys. Moshe's mother, Yocheved, sneaks away and puts him into the Nile to be saved. Now, one way to look at that is incredibly heroic. I mean, she basically said, I won't take this. But another way of reading this is, she was not, and also she was risking her life by doing anything else but that. She was going to lose either her baby or herself. So it's not easy to say she was stood up and said, I'm going to take on Pharaoh. I mean, she didn't have power. But, by doing the Nile and through the daughter and kind of hiding his nature and who he was, being raised in the palace, and being raised by Pharaoh, who is a kind of a father figure, but he's also ends up becoming the enemy. Moses has to play this dance. Do I tell my stepfather, that I'm against him? Do I tell him he's doing this unjust? Do I tell my mother that she's the daughter of Pharaoh and Bat Paro? And his own mother, Yocheved, the way she dealt with conflict or injustice is she was sneaky and went around. Again, I'm not only putting it down, but that's how she dealt with it. So the model he was raised with was one of avoidance or really deep complexity. He's both has allegiance to Pharaoh, gratitude to daughter of Bat Paro, but he's also knows something wrong. He doesn't want to do something. He has this Hebrew background. He's conflicted. And in fact, in that famous part of the early story, when he sees Hebrew slaves being beaten, he kills the Egyptian taskmaster. So now you might say he's not conflict averse there, but in some ways that's like disproportionate. Like, he's conflicted. He either stays quiet, doesn't do anything, struggles internally, or then when he finally loses it. And it's violent. And in fact, that causes him to have to flee. He struggles, like all of us, with how to deal with conflict. With family members, with adopted family members, with his own people, with Egyptians, and he has to go run away and on his own has to come to realize. And then when he gets the message, at the burning bush, you're going to go and free and tell Pharaoh, he's like, who's going to listen to me? It's not only I'm chopped liver, but it's like, I read, I don't want to do this. He's going to tell his own father figure that he's evil, unjust. He's not going to be listened to. He's conflict averse, or he doesn't know how to deal with conflict properly, or he doesn't know his role. Now fast forward to this week's Parsha. One of the powerful scenes is when he sees Pharaoh killed. It's not just this enemy, which is true. Not just an oppressor, true. When he tried to commit genocide, it's true. But it's also a man on some level who saved his life. Bat Paro has been a mother figure to him from since he was a baby. So he's watching a defeat of a man who has complex feelings about, who he hesitated to even confront in the beginning and now finally sees him die. You can imagine this is not all just an easy celebration of singing of the sea. It's conflicted. But he did it. In a way, this is a moment of really a triumph, not only over Pharaoh, but really over his own challenge over conflict. But I want to just take that as a background story to say, I think this is the key lesson, and I take this certainly as a rabbi. Moshe, in the end, if he started being conflict averse, if you accept my premise, in the end, he is not afraid, or he's willing to be conflict engaging. Not only with Pharaoh, but he argues with God. When God says, get away, I want to destroy this people, they're acting so terribly. He says, he tells God the news, hey, don't do that. In fact, if you're going to do that, erase me too. Not, of course, we know he goes amongst Bnei Israel, our people, and when we're complaining various times, he tells us what to do with Korach and others, quail, complaining, the bitter waters. Very soon, he's going to tell us, our people, bad news, harshly. So he tells Pharaoh, he's willing to tell God, he's willing to tell the people. He's all around, willing to, ultimately, he's not conflict averse anymore. He's willing to speak truth, even when it's difficult. But what's the consequence? Right? There's a downside. It's edifying. It's worthy of praise. Again, just to take a moment, Martin Luther King, the greatest of many parts of Martin Luther King's life, and we know that he's not a perfect person. He had his faults as well. But in terms of his leadership, is he was willing to stand up publicly and speak truth to power. Speak truth with just beautiful poetic words that were so morally compelling, words rooted in the Hebrew Bible, the Bible in general, the prophets. It was inspiring. It touched the heart, the soul, the morality, the conscience of the world, not just our country. But doing that work, when you're willing and able, or you choose that you must speak up, and wherever you see it, you're going to call it, and you're going to say something about it. The consequence of that is isolation. The consequence of that is that people aren't necessarily going to like you. They may even think that you are right, but it's not pleasant to be told. Can you imagine how God felt? That you're making a mistake or doing something wrong, or your morality's in the wrong place. It can be very lonely to be the prophet, as wonderful as it is. And we know from Martin Luther King's diaries and his letters, he did have a circle of friends. Clearly had a family. He had other relationships too. But there were times where he was on his own. Ultimately, he had to carry a lot that not anyone else or very few understood. Maybe Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, Alav Shalom, he had a very special connection. One of the things Heschel had as well is he spoke prophetic words, and he had followers, but he also at times, we have to imagine, felt alone. When you're willing to call people out, when you feel called to call people out, the consequence is loneliness. And the power of that is that Moshe, in the end, we know he died not in the promised land, on the other side, an unmarked grave. There's a beautiful teaching about that. I have another sermon about that, but there is a loneliness to that. There's an isolation to that. And we know in this pandemic, exponentially, that loneliness is a price. There's a big price for that. So my read of this is that Moshe is not just conflict averse only because he was raised in a conflict averse way, not only because of his conflicted feelings about the people he's challenging. Right? He has to love God, appreciate God, respect God, and yet also challenge God. Imagine. But also Moshe experiences, sees, maybe when he sees his own Pharaoh figure, father-ish figure killed, that there's no one that's going to understand him. He's going to have to speak up and deal with the consequence of that, which is loneliness and isolation to some degree. So what's the remedy? What I want to say here for us, it's as a take-home, is that all of us, whether it's in our families or amongst friends, business situation, religious community, whatever it is, there are times where we see something wrong. We feel we need called to say something about it. And there are ways to do it. There's a proper way, there's a thoughtful way, there's a menschlich way to do it. But some of us avoid doing it, not just because we're conflict averse, because we don't like getting upset. I mean, that's true. But because we know that if we do that, we're going to put ourselves in maybe even a minority position. Maybe some people may not like us for what we say. That's a serious thing to carry. So at the same time, I think I want to put on the table here that one of the messages when Moshe sees Pharaoh die is that if you want to be a leader, if you want to speak up, if you want to be like Moshe, come ready with people around you who will stand by you, who will love you, who will hold you, who will try to understand you, who will tell you when you think you're not doing it right either, be prophetic with you. Be ready, come prepared. There's a book that I read, it's classic, called Leadership on the Line by professors at Harvard. It talks about this issue, that in the end, you're not making change, you're not being a leader unless you get resistance, unless you get pushback. That's when you know you're doing something important. That's when you know that something's actually changing because people are feeling risked by it, they're feeling pushed by it. Moshe can't understand that. Martin Luther King clearly understood that. Even a regular clergy person in shul. Not looking to upset people, but when I see something and I have to say it, I feel called to say it. Not looking forward to upsetting people. Believe me, it's not my nature just to want to. So what I've learned is that I have to have support. People around me. Not necessarily have to agree with me 100%, but they're willing to support me, stand with me, hold me. Friends, partners, community members. Moshe, Martin Luther King, a regular clergy person. That leadership work, that conflict work, it can be lonely. Do we avert it? Yeah, even Moses averted it. But in the end, when he did it, when he pushed it, that's one of the greatest things we remember him for. May we be strengthened, encouraged, urged, nudged to speak up in honor of Martin Luther King, who did this so powerfully. Alav Shalom Moshe, Alav Shalom, and others. May we speak up, but also be ready for the pushback and have people around us ready to support us when it can be hard to be a voice in the wilderness. Shabbat Shalom, a meaningful MLK day. Be safe, all those in Raleigh, with the storm coming, please God, and a Tu B'Shvat Sameach. Kol Tuv.